Hello and welcome to today's webinar on navigating Microsoft Power Platform licensing. My name is Carl O'Doherty and I'll be guiding you through today's presentation. In today's presentation, we're going to go through a number of key topics. We're going to do a bit of an introduction first into who I am and some insights on the market and where Power Platform sits within the market. From there, we're going to drill down into Power Platform into a bit more detail, break it down into the sum of its parts. The objective of this webinar is really to help you as our customers and organizations out there to understand and evaluate the various different licensing models that exist out there for Power Platform, helping you understand the differences between freeware bundled options versus paid product. We're also looking to do within this webinar is to remove some of the misconceptions and complexity around free versus bundled versus paid. So hopefully remove some of the complexities that you might be experiencing right now around trying to get to grips with and understand Power Platform licensing. So as I said, my name is Carl O'Doherty. I'm a principal Microsoft licensing consultant at version1. I have deep experience with helping customers in the area of Microsoft licensing. I work extensively with customers to help them understand what their Microsoft license position is, help organizations construct licensing solutions for Microsoft technology. I also do quite a lot of work around the area of contract negotiation services, so helping customers negotiate and renew their enterprise agreements with Microsoft, and then when required or when asked upon, I also do work within the audit defense space, so helping customers who are in that distressed position when faced with an audit from Microsoft, helping them to manage that and navigate that effectively. I've been working within the software asset management industry for, gosh, I think over 15 or so years, so very much institutionalized at this stage. So looking at the market itself, I think it's possibly fair to say that Power Platform is what Microsoft often describe as their next big bet. This quote here from Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella back in January of 2019, I think really illustrates the importance of Power Platform and how it has become or was going to become very much intertwined with all of Microsoft's key services, such as Microsoft 365 and Office 365. The perception out there right now is that Power Platform will be Microsoft's next $10 billion company. And I think it's fair to say that this isn't just marketing FUD or not just fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Power Platform has at this stage quite a mature set of capabilities, and that's recognized in the industry when we look at what Gartner has to say on those capabilities. So when we break down the Power Platform into various different elements, including Power BI, Power Apps, Power Automate, and Power Virtual Agents, it's clear to see that within those product sets and the segments that those product sets sit within, Microsoft are leaders or visionaries within various different Gartner Magic Quadrants. So for example, across analytics, business intelligence, low-code application platforms, as well as cloud and AI developer services, Microsoft are described as leaders in those segments. And then when it comes to robot process automation or RPA software, again, Microsoft not far off the leader status, but being categorized as visionary. So it's clear to see that Microsoft have a very credible offer when all of the components are bundled together, which I think Microsoft traditionally does a really good job of bundling applications together. The strategy that Microsoft use to market these products is a very sticky data first strategy. They're marketing Power Platform from the bottom up to monetize your business applications and data. They use this concept of marketing to citizen developers. So no longer are they marketing tools to those technical stakeholders within your organizations. These tools are being marketed towards actual end users themselves, and in turn, giving those end users what might be described as overnight software development superpowers, which can be quite useful in terms of some of the cost benefits and the operational benefits that can help deliver by removing some of those traditional costs and time to market or build applications within your organization. However, without fully understanding the implications of what those users are doing, that can have an impact around data control as well as possible impact in terms of costs, where the licensing element, which we're here today to discuss in a bit more detail, isn't properly understood, leading to potential cost overruns or unforeseen expenditure. So what is Power Platform? So Power Platform is an extensible low-code platform that spans across Office 365, Dynamics, Azure, and standalone applications. Many of you will be familiar with the fact that many of the Power Platform components themselves come included with Microsoft services. So anybody who's using Office 365 or Dynamics 365 will be familiar with that. Anybody who's in an Office 365 environment right now, if you click on your application tray, you'll see that you'll have some of these components within your application tray if your systems administrators don't have those controls in place. But outside of what's included with those products, there are also standalone products within the Power Platform that have a separate licensing model completely and include a whole set of additional features and capabilities. From Power BI for business analytics, for Power Apps for application development, low code, no code application development, Power Automate for workflow automation, and Power Virtual Agents or intelligent virtual agents for no code creation of chatbots. You've got the Dataverse platform, which is the underlying data store. You've got a range of data connectors, and then you've also got AI Builder capabilities in there within the platform itself. The first product that we're going to look at in a little bit more detail is Power BI. So Power BI breaks down into three key flavors: free, pro, and premium. So if we look at the free one first, as it says on the tin, it is free, so therefore it is freeware. It's best suited to, I would say, hobbyists or individuals that might consume reports occasionally. I know from experience and working in the small business space that if you don't have a requirement to refresh reports frequently, you don't need to have enhanced security or storage capabilities, it's quite a good little product, and it could get you just the right level of functionality that you need. But stepping up from that then is the next tier, which is the pro version, which is Microsoft describe as their paid entry level license. It's best fit for, say, organizations with 500 users within their organization who need to construct or edit reports and dashboards. It has limited performance and security capabilities that might constrain some large enterprise organizations. How you license it, there's a various different means or pathways to licensing the product. You can purchase it as a standalone license or a user subscription license. And it also comes bundled with Office 365 E5 or M365 E5 if you have those licenses today, as well as coming bundled with the most recent addition to the Microsoft Power BI licensing family, Power BI Premium per user licenses. Which is a good segue to the next option or flavor is Power BI Premium, which includes a set of advanced performance and security features when compared against the professional edition. It's typically targeted at larger organizations or enterprises that will have more demanding data security and performance requirements. How it's licensed, there's two variations to this. So historically, anybody who's looked at Power BI will be aware of the fact that Power BI Premium was always based on a capacity-based licensing model that was best fit for, say, organizations that had in excess of 500 users. That's changed somewhat in the recent past, in the last number of months. I think it was that Microsoft have introduced this per user licensing, which gives organizations of a smaller size access to these advanced capabilities, but at a much more competitive price point. So in essence, it mitigates the need to purchase a capacity-based license that might not necessarily be fit for purpose for mid-sized organizations. It's also important to call out that you also need Power BI Pro licenses in there for your users that will construct or edit reports and dashboards, so that it doesn't mitigate the need if you're using the capacity-based licensing for any of those Power BI Pro licenses that you may need within your estate. But I suppose to conclude then on the premium SKU, it's best fit for, say, large organizations that will have those additional security and performance requirements. And I think, when we look at a capacity-based model, when we start to scale things up and go over the 500 user threshold, it starts to make more economic sense than, say, purchasing Power BI Pro for a broad number of users, perhaps. So plenty of options there for you to slice and dice. There is no one size fits all approach. So really important that you understand exactly what are the technical features that you require and how does that align with what your end users are going to be licensed for. There are some additional options out there, embedded options for Power BI Premium. So you have Power BI Premium embedded and Azure Power BI embedded, Power BI embedded. If we look at the first one, Power BI Premium embedded, this is possibly best fit, I guess you could describe, being best fit for internal users. So it allows you to share via internal line of business applications and websites. It's based on an annual capacity charge model. Again, recurring theme here, you'll still need a Power BI Pro user subscription license for users that construct or edit reports and dashboards. And then if we flip over to the Azure Power BI Premium or Azure Power BI Embedded, for all intents and purposes, the same capabilities and features that you would have as a part of Power BI Premium are included. The target audience here is more so for ISVs. The sharing must take place via apps and websites for external users. It's got a monthly capacity charge model. And again, that recurring theme, if you're going to construct, edit reports and dashboards, you will still need a Power BI Pro user subscription license in there as well. So next product we're going to talk about is Power Apps. So I think literally everybody is talking about Power Apps these days. And if you're not talking about it, the chances are you will be talking about it in the not too distant future. But there's a lot of confusion and misconceptions out there around how is it actually licensed. One of the things I often hear from customers when I talk to them is that, well, why do I need a license for this? Doesn't it not just come with Office 365? Don't I not get all the license entitlement I need with my Dynamics licenses? Or I need a I need a per user plan versus a per app plan. I really want that all-you-can-eat buffet, but that might not necessarily be the most economical way of doing things. I always like to use a terminology, your best, pay as you grow, as opposed to jumping, feet first in and acquiring, what might be described as full fat licenses that might not necessarily be required. Power Apps portals, stuff is really easy to use and roll out relative terms. And so some organizations think that that's a kind of a one size fits all solution, and that's not necessarily the case, because Power Apps portals, as good as it is, it can have significant cost implications if it's been used in the wrong scenario. Multiplexing, a recurring licensing theme in the world of Microsoft licensing. I don't need to worry about multiplexing now. I'm in the cloud, right? That's not necessarily the case. It actually swings both ways. Multiplexing can be a risk where you're using third-party data sources to connect to the Power Platform. Those third-party applications might have a licensing implication when doing that. So it's really good to understand, if connecting to third-party data sources, am I licensed accordingly to do that with that third-party vendor? And equally as important when looking at other Microsoft solutions. So for example, SQL Server, if connecting into a SQL Server environment to access data, if that's on premise, say for example, or if it's in the cloud, is the right licensing type assigned to that SQL Server? Do I actually have the right licensing model in place to allow that type of connectivity? And then the final misconception is really around just a general observation, is a lot of organizations out there assume that SaaS equals compliance, and that's not necessarily always the case. Not all features have compliance gates built in. So it's really important that organizations take the time to understand where the vendor has limitations in terms of tracking capacity. Is there a risk in the future that might change, and what's the impact of that going to be? But then also, making sure that you're aware of any license traps that might exist with regards to the use of the product, so that you're not going to fall outside of the licensing terms and fall victim if in terms of if you're faced with an audit at some point in the future, or if Microsoft for whatever reason decided to increase compliance features within the product, and then all of a sudden you see an overnight loss of functionality, which could have a material impact on business operations. So Power Apps licensing metrics. So Microsoft have multiple flavors of licensing Power Apps. You've got included options, you've got per app plans, per user plans, you've got included rights, you've got authenticated, or you've got per login licensing models, you've got per page view licensing models. So when all these things are combined, it gets a little bit confusing as to which one do you need. So in order to try and define which license type is best fit for your organization, the first thing is to look at the user types that are out there. So the first thing is to try and understand, are the users internal and authenticated? If so, then could you use a Power Apps per app plan, a per user plan, or could you perhaps leverage some of the existing entitlement that you have as a part of Dynamics 365 enterprise licenses or Office 365? The second user type is the external authenticated user, and in that scenario, that's best fit for per login, which is charged for on a tier-based licensing model. Which we'll get into that in a little bit more detail. And then it's somewhat similar, again, a capacity-based licensing. Will the users be unauthenticated, so therefore impossible to ascertain how many of those users would log in, because they're not, they're just coming in over the web. So in that scenario, a per page view based licensing model is available from Microsoft. But I think that the key thing here is, as a part of your evaluation, I think it's important that licensing is an integral part of the overall solution design. There are certain scenarios where the cost of Power Apps can be prohibitive. So it's really important that you understand what they are, and how you manage against that. And then once you do make that transition into Power Apps, and it's a recurring theme in today's webinar, is the importance of continual governance, and some form of containment process that allows you to control your usage and any associated costs within your Power Apps environment. So Power Apps licensing models. There are a number of options here available to you. So license included rights are a key theme here, as well as paid standalone licenses. So if we look at the license included rights, first of all, with Office 365, your Office 365 licenses will include Canvas and model-driven app entitlements. So if we look at Canvas apps, first of all, you have the ability to create, access, unlimited Canvas apps using standalone connectors to extend the Office 365 applications, or using Dataverse for Teams. For model-driven apps with your license included rights, you'll get the ability to create model-driven apps in Dataverse for Teams in the not too distant future. For Dynamics, somewhat similar here again, you have the ability to run standalone Canvas apps within the same environment as the Dynamics 365 apps. So again, take note, within the same environment. So falling outside of that walled garden could create license compliance headaches. For model-driven apps, you have the ability to run standalone model-driven apps within the same environment again as the Dynamics 365 apps. And then a user can access a portal app mapped to the Dynamics 365 environment as an authenticated internal user. So I think that the key thing to call out here is that, with the license included options for Power Apps with Office 365 and Dynamics 365, you are very much constrained to work within the walled gardens of those products. So falling outside of that could create some license compliance headaches for your organization. Stepping up from that, then you've got your Power Apps per app plan, your Power Apps per user plan. So with the Canvas apps per Power Apps per app plan, you get the ability to run 2 standalone apps, either Canvas or model driven, using standard, premium, or custom connectors within one environment. The user can access one portal app as an authenticated internal user. And then if we move across the line to the per user plan, which is more like a all-you-can-eat buffet, you have the ability to run an unlimited number of Canvas apps using standard, premium, custom connectors in your tenant. And also as a guest in other tenants, which could be important for some organizations. You have the ability to run an unlimited number of model-driven apps, and then finally the users can access portal apps as an authenticated internal user as required. I have a small section at the bottom of that chart. You'll see Power App logins, which I'll discuss in a little bit more detail, but as you can see below, sold in packs of 100 for the Power Apps login capacity, and then Power Apps portal page views are sold in packs of 100,000 page views at $100 per month. I'll get into a little bit more detail on what that looks like and how you calculate those costs in the next couple of slides. So per app versus per user plans. This is an interesting observation. When we look at the per app plan versus the per user plan, there's quite a large difference in price, 120% price difference. I think there's a possible misconception out there that I need a per user plan because it's going to reduce the complexity of license management, and I'm going to scale, and we're going to have loads of apps over time, and this is probably best fit for my organization. But I would always say that is probably the wrong strategy to take, and that with particularly modern Microsoft licensing programs like CSP, for example, you have the ability to pay as you grow. And so, jumping in 2 feet first with a per user plan might not make economical sense. It's also important to point out that you can actually stack those per app plans on top of each other. So you're not limited to just one per app plan per user. One user can actually have 2 per app plans aside to them. And again, that can keep your cost down. Obviously, there will come a point when you stack X number of per app plans on top of each other, it'll start to break even, and so it becomes more economical to go the per user plan. But I would always encourage organizations to look at the potential to stack plans on top of each other. There are other considerations to take into account there in terms of some of the Dataverse entitlement that will come with those per app versus per user plans. Also, the number of API calls might be a defining factor as to, do you have sufficient daily API calls included with the per app plans versus the per user plans? Do those API calls need to be topped up with a capacity add-on? If so, what are the cost implications of doing that? But I think it's fair to say that Microsoft have provided organizations with a way to streamline their licensing costs through the use of these per app plans. A really good example of this is around the dynamic space, where we see organizations leveraging per apps or per user plans for that matter to reduce their overall licensing cost, where suitable functionality can be attained through the use of those apps working in tandem with Dynamics. That is I think when we look at Dynamics as an example, it's a product that we see, many end users having, what might be described as full fat licenses, but actually not using all of the functionality that they require. They may be occasional users reading content as opposed to writing content. So in that scenario, I think Power Apps gives organizations a great opportunity to reduce some of their licensing costs without sacrificing access to the Dynamics platform for certain types of user profiles within their organization. Power Apps portal add-ons. So this slide here, I'm going to use a bit of a theme park analogy here to break down some of the complexity of Microsoft licensing for Power Apps. So think about each login as like a theme park day pass. The pass allows an external authenticated user as many rides or logons to a single portal within 24 hours. So if a user logs into a portal 1 or 50 times in that 24 hours, that's just counted as one billable material. Now, what happens if the user decides to go to a different theme park in the same day? That obviously has a licensing implication to use our analogy. So in that scenario, if I'm a user and in the morning I go to portal A and in the afternoon I go to portal B, in that scenario, I'm using 2 logins. So I'm using 2 day passes because I'm connecting into 2 separate portals. The portal packs themselves are sold in batches of 100 logins. It's based on tiered pricing. So the more logins you buy, the higher the tier you get. Microsoft right now have 3 tiers. I believe that is going to change in the near future. And you can stack tiers on top of each other if you're, somewhere in between the threshold of different tiers. So don't feel that you have to go up to the highest tier straight away. Understand exactly where those breakpoints are, so that you're purchasing sufficient tier packs without overextending yourself. The cost of Power App portals can be prohibitive for large-scale external facing portals, it should be called out. I mentioned before, sometimes customers have this perception that it's a one size fits all approach. Customers need to be aware of the fact that there are alternative solutions out there where the cost of this just doesn't stack up. So for example, some form of custom development application that, once it's built, there's no major licensing implication, could be a viable alternative. Or, in some cases, you may be trying to solve a specific business problem that there may be an off-the-shelf application for that could be used in its place. So be really aware of that. Power Apps portals can become quite expensive if you don't properly forecast and understand what that level of connectivity may look like. And the same goes for the page view model as well. Really important that you understand the implications, the cost implications, and forecast that demand accordingly. Moving on to Power Automate. So Power Automate is it includes, again, the recurring theme here: license included, entitlement, as well as paid licenses. So organizations that might need fully fledged general purpose workflow or business process automation or robotic process automation capabilities need to look at one of the paid tiers. So that can be attained using a per user license, a per user with attended RPA, or a per flow license. So looking at the per user license, first of all, that'll allow individuals to create unlimited flows based on their unique needs. The RPA, or per user with attended RPA, will allow users to create unlimited flows and automate legacy applications through RPA and AI. And then per flow allows the implementation of flows with reserved capacity that serve, say, unlimited users across an organization. However, a lot of you who've looked at Power Automate will be familiar with the fact that it is incorporated within many of the Microsoft products that you currently use, so Office 365, Dynamics, and Power Apps. There's a recurring theme in terms of how the license included rights work for these products, in that, if we look at Office 365, for example, it allows you the ability to customize and extend the productivity experience that you might have within Office 365, but its use is limited to the context of the embedding Office 365 application. Somewhat similar again to Dynamics, it's limited to the embedding of the Dynamics 365 application. And in both cases, so if you look at Office 365, for example, if you are embedding flows that are not used within the context of Office 365, or you're embedding flows that connect to premium on-premise or custom data sources, in that scenario, you're going to need to purchase one of those standalone licenses, be it a per user or flow license. Somewhat similar again with Dynamics. So once you step outside that Dynamics walled garden, and you're not using within the context of the Dynamics 365 application, that's then when you start to need to look at stepping those users up to a paid Power Automate license. Power Apps, again, similar theme here. It's got to be used within the context of the Power App application. If that flow is, say, isolated and has nothing to do with Power Apps application, then you're going to need to look at a standalone Power Automate license to cover off that requirement. Power Virtual Agents. So Power Virtual Agents, what do they do? So they enable users to easily build intelligent no-code chatbots that integrate with data sources via pre-built Microsoft Power Platform connectors. Again, it leverages the Power Automate technology to complete these actions so that chatbots can answer questions that might be posed from, say, your customers, partners, or visitors to a website or service that you may have. How it's licensed, it's done on a per tenant basis. How you purchase the licenses are based on kind of a capacity-based type licensing model, again, where the initial Power Virtual Agent license will include 2,000 sessions per month. And then if you need to increase the number of sessions, you can buy them in blocks of 1,000 sessions per month. A bit like Power BI, you'll also need a piece of software to author bots, right? So in this case, Power Virtual Agent user license is required. Good news here is that it's actually free. There's no licensing cost associated at this point in time. It's also important to call out that there are other capacity grants out there within some of the Microsoft products that you're currently using that have Power Virtual Agent entitlement included. So first one to call out is with regards to the Dynamics side of things. So chat for Dynamics 365 customer service and Dynamics 365 digital messaging includes 1,000 sessions per month. Again, the ability to step up that capacity is available through those add-ons. And then Power Virtual Agents for Teams includes rights to build and deploy chatbots only within the Teams environment. So those rights are typically included with Office 365 plans. To confirm that for sure, I always recommend that you might best consult the Microsoft product terms to validate what rights are included. Microsoft has a tendency to change these things as time goes by, so always reference the product terms or the associated licensing guides for these products to understand what the current grants may look like. Power Virtual Agent license management, right? So actually, there's a couple of points here that overlap that I haven't mentioned on some of the previous slides, but kind of if I draw some of the comments here, if I align them with Power Apps portals, for example, there's some similarities here. So capacity is enforced monthly. Unused sessions do not carry over month to month, so it's a use it or lose it type scenario. Microsoft say that occasional reasonable outages will be tolerated, and customers that are exceeding purchase capacity should adjust entitlement to remain in compliance. So that logic can apply to both Power Virtual Agents and also to Power Platform portal licensing. It's important to call out. In conclusion, on Power Virtual Agents themselves, at 50 cents per chat session, it can be quite costly if you've got over eager customers or partners accessing the service, or if you haven't effectively forecasted what demand may potentially look like and what high watermarks might exist within the implementation once live. So forecasting demand is therefore essential if you want to understand the estimated total cost of ownership, so you avoid potential sticker shock down the line. I called out how Microsoft indicates overages are tolerated. So that indicates that there is a degree of flexibility there from Microsoft. It also is an indicator that Microsoft are working on improving some of the capacity management limits within the Power Platform itself, particularly for Power Virtual Agents and for Power Apps portals, I would say. But that doesn't seem to be fully implemented yet, although there is a raft of new features coming down the line in the latter part of this year. But so that's really important to customers to realize that that controls are not necessarily all there right now. So it's important that they keep check on capacity utilization, be it overages or underages, both equally as important. One is obviously going to drive potential license compliance risk and unforeseen expenditure. The other is going to result in, wasted company funds or organization funds on entitlement that's just not being used on a monthly basis. That could ultimately be scaled back. It's also worth calling out in the context of Power Virtual Agents, the use of the Microsoft Bot Framework or Azure Bot Services may be a viable alternative. In some scenarios, it actually might be a lower cost alternative, although you're not going to get that no code experience. So there is going to be associated development costs there. And also, if extending and scaling, should I say, there will be supplementary Azure costs there as well. So it actually in the long term might not necessarily be as cost effective. But having said that, for certain usage scenarios, it's worth investigating during the planning stages to see is there a viable alternative there, within the Microsoft ecosystem. So some other considerations. So we look at, we've looked at all of the various different components or the key components within Power Platform. There's another number of other considerations to take into account. So Dataverse is the first one that we'll talk about, which was formerly known as the Common Data Service. So as I touched on at the start of the presentation, this is the primary storage mechanism for Power Platform. Every time you buy an Office 365 or a Dynamics license or a standalone Power App or a Power Automate license, it will include some entitlement or grants um, for Dataverse. However, in some organizations, you may exceed that capacity grant that you're given, and there will be a need to increase the number of capacity units that are required within the organization. Those capacity units are sold in increments of 1 gig for database capacity, file capacity, and log capacity. For organizations that are embarking on that journey of migrating to Dynamics Online, or sorry, to say Dynamics 365, or implementing Power Apps at scale, whatnot, should closely examine what those costs may look like, particularly if you're about to enter into some form of a new strategic agreement with Microsoft. By having an accurate understanding of what your data requirements are, that can be quite useful in terms of trying to negotiate more competitive rates on storage itself, versus moving into a standard-based pricing model. So really good to understand those up front in advance to see is there any leverage points that can be used as a part of a negotiation with Microsoft. It's also worth calling out that the entitlements for Dataverse are pooled and shared across users at a tenant level. So some customers can purchase services and find that some of the Dataverse capability that they get with certain licenses can bring down storage costs or capacity costs elsewhere. So it's really important that you model this out. We've got some really nice calculators built on this stuff. So if you've got any questions after today's session, or you've got particular scenarios that you want to run by us, feel free to reach out to us. The next component that I'd like to talk about is around Power Platform API requests. So Microsoft have enforced limits with regards to the number of API requests or daily API requests associated with Power Apps and Power Automate. It's true for both standalone and license included entitlement. So this isn't just limited to, if you want to call it the free stuff, it also applies to, paid standalone licenses as well. If that's going to be a concern for some organizations, there is the ability to apply capacity add-on units. They're sold in packs of 10,000 daily Power Platform requests. So 1 unit equals 10,000 daily requests. I mentioned earlier on how some organizations are stepping between, Dynamics to Power Apps per app plans to reduce licensing costs. The number of API requests could be a limiting factor there for some organizations. So that's a good example of trying to understand where do those constraints exist within the organization. And Microsoft have introduced some compliance controls on that front that limit those APIs. So if it's not properly planned for, there could be some form of deterioration in service as Microsoft throttle the service that you get, where you start to exceed those daily request levels. And then the final consideration here is around the AI Builder capacity add-on. So this is again as it kind of says, a capacity-based licensing model linked to service credits. 1 unit equals 1 billion monthly service credits. They're assigned at a tenant level. There are other licensing pathways there to AI Builder that you might not necessarily be aware of. So for example, there's limited grants for AI Builder capability included with Dynamics enterprise applications. And also with Power Automate subscriptions associated with RPA, there's limited monthly credits included in there. But I think ultimately, when we start to look at capacity-based licensing, this is what I might describe as the kind of new frontier of Microsoft license management. It really does require effective design and ongoing governance, I would say, to mitigate not just the risk of non-compliance, but also service interruptions where you don't have sufficient capacity, but also avoiding that situation where you get some sticker shock further down the line as a result of unforeseen expenditure or the need to add unforeseen capacity to the estate because it just wasn't fully understood at the planning stage. Also fair to say that these things take time to bed down, and it can be risky investing in excess capacity upfront as well. So it's a bit of a fine balancing act, and I think that's where the importance, as I've touched on before, of having licensing teams working in tandem with, or should I say licensing specialists working in tandem with technical specialists to help build the solution, taking all these considerations into account. So to conclude, a couple of key points to take away here. Last one I've actually just touched on. So the importance of having technical and licensing specialists working in tandem with each other is key. Licensing, particularly for Power Platform and things like Power Apps in particular, can have a significant impact on the ultimate solution that is chosen. So it's really important that you involve your licensing specialists, if you have those resources internally, within those technical conversations to ensure that all the licensing implications are being properly thought through. It's also important to understand, what's your licensing posture. So get a good understanding of what entitlement do you currently hold, right? You might actually find that you've got some licenses for the capabilities that you initially need within your estate, and that there's no major licensing overhead to get started with Power Platform. It could be that you've got licenses within the estate that might not necessarily be used right now. So, particularly with online services, there's always a great opportunity there for organizations to harvest entitlement and reuse that within the business if it's not currently being used in another part of a business. As I touched on, be mindful of compliance traps, right? So SaaS or cloud doesn't equal license compliance. There's still trust-based models out there. So it's really important that you understand those, where they exist, and you plan around those. Profile and design a right-sized licensing footprint is key. So, again, the importance of having technical and licensing stakeholders working in tandem with each other to help define the right licensing footprint. And then, as I touched on previously, implementing sufficient governance to prevent waste and protect data. So this isn't a one and done type exercise. It needs continual ongoing management and governance. It requires, again, your licensing teams to work in tandem with your technical teams to understand, if there's changes to the licensing terms, how do they impact the organization? Is there forward planning required to mitigate against any potential changes in licensing structure that might have a cost implication or may impact on the availability of features further down the line? And then finally, leverage third-party support. At VersionOne, we're a broad systems integrator. We also have a dedicated software asset management practice within the organization. So we've kind of got that unique blend of skills to help customers navigate Power Platform licensing and deployments as they go from planning to implementation to ongoing support once live. So on that note, anybody who's attended today's webinar, we are offering a complimentary license consultation session with one of our consultants from the SAM practice on the Microsoft side of the house. I'd like to open up the invite to talk about anything that's Power Platform related, but if you have any burning questions or concerns around Microsoft licensing in general, we'd be delighted to extend that offer to talk about other Microsoft related products, not just Power Platform. Or it could be that you're approaching a Microsoft agreement renewal and you're looking for guidance in terms of what's the optimal way to approach that. So feel free to reach out to us. We'd be delighted to set that session up and hopefully be able to break down some of the complexities associated with Microsoft licensing within your organization. So again, thank you for attending today's session. Our contact details are there. If there is anything that we can help with post-session today, do feel free to reach out to us, and we'll look forward to seeing you on our upcoming licensing sessions on all things Microsoft. Take care.